Welcome back, or welcome to the Rebel Tech Podcast. Per usual, I'm your host today, David Dunmoyer, and we're going to talk about the promises and perils of all things emerging technology, but not just in Texas today, and not just in the other 49 states, but nationally. Today, I'm joined with somebody who's recently become a good friend, partner in crime on tech policy, and conservative Washington, D.C. whisperer, Luke Hogg, who's joining us from the Foundation for American Innovation. And before I kick to you, I want to say we're shooting this end of November, and yesterday we had a phenomenal discussion on AI, the future of tech in Texas. And while you're joining us from DC, you are a native-born Texan, is that right?
I am indeed. So I was born and raised in San Angelo, Texas. So go Bobcats. So I do have some Texas credentials. I do. My whole family still lives in Texas, but I am a swamp critter now.
Yeah. Well, and you, I didn't realize this until like midway through our panel yesterday. I was looking at the stage. You were the only person wearing cowboy boots.
Well, I have to literally my I was like trying to figure out what to bring because I'm sticking around for Thanksgiving, going to see the family, and what to bring. And my girlfriend was like, "You cannot wear Chuck Taylors on stage in Texas. Like you have to wear your boots because I do wear them around DC as well. So it's not a LARP, I promise." Yeah,
no, it's funny too because I was flying back from Amarillo a few weeks ago. Which can you get more Texan than that? And well, you can, because there was a guy who was flying into Amarillo, and he was walking to exit to get baggage and all. He's like, "Man, I can't wait to get home and back to my cowboy boots. There's just not room in my bag to pack them." I'm like, that's not the most Texan thing. Beautiful thing. Well, okay, Luke. We're just gonna fly by the seat of our pants here today.
Yeah.
Because we haven't had any discussions on this pod about what's happening nationally. We haven't even talked about the election yet. So let's start there.
Trump won.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Trump won.
Are we going to verify the electorates or?
No, I think that we really have hit a phase shift in terms of where policy is, right? So this would be a very different obviously a very different conversation if the election had gone completely the other direction. Right. But the fact that there is unified Republican government is an absolutely massive thing for all policy, right? So I mean, we're looking at tax reform, we're looking at immigration reform, we're looking at a lot of things that are going to be coming out of the administration and are going to be coming out of Congress over the next few years. But it's especially interesting for tech policy, just because the difference between what the Biden White House was doing and what Democrats in Congress want on tech policy and what Republicans are looking at is so stark that it's very exciting. It is a very exciting, and we're very optimistic about the future of what's gonna happen in the next 2 to 4 years.
Well, and that's the sense, to take a tagline, is we're back, right? Whether it's UFC, Dana White walking out with Trump and Elon and Speaker Johnson and all that. There was another very successful SpaceX launch that happened this week in Texas. And I guess my question to you is, with that sense of we're back, there's been this almost contrition that, man, the last 4 years we haven't built, we haven't developed, we haven't grown. It's kind of been holding on for dear life. Do you think the focus is on building, innovating, and developing business side, like even forgetting politics for a second here? What is the Trump effect there in terms of we're back to building and innovating?
Well, I think you're totally right. That is the vibe shift. The vibe shift is now like we're back and America is going to start building again. Something that we haven't done for a long time. And I think to push back a little bit, because you just said we haven't built in 4 years, right? In the last 8 years. And looking at these kind of things, but we really haven't built in the last 40 years, right? Yeah. So this is, and I think it's been really interesting to see what's happened in the states like Texas, where most of the building that's happened in the past few years has come from red states. You're seeing Space Coast come out, the idea of commercial spaceflight, I think is can't be overstated as the impact that has on kind of the national character, but also as a metaphor and a shining beacon of what we can do if we unleash innovation, if we unleash kind of the American economy. And so, I mean, I think what we're going to see is across the board, right? So part of what was happening under the Biden administration and through kind of Democrat controlled Congress was a lot of restrictions being put in place. So a really good example of this is Chips and Science Act, right? So we decided that we're going to bring back semiconductor manufacturing to the United States. Well, what did they do? They threw in a bunch of DEI mandates, like you have to use union labor and you have to have childcare for people that are working. And this is kind of this Ezra Klein idea of everything bagel liberal policy, right? Where like, so the original idea of that, the original idea of Chips and Science and doing industrial policy was great. And then it just gets completely washed out. And now what you're seeing is Biden, he wasted a lot of time trying to get money and get this program going. And now at the ninth hour, he's having to try and scramble to get money out the door because he's scared of what the Trump administration is going to do and kind of cut back a lot of those regulations. So at a very high level, I think there is a big push and a big moment right now to get rid of a lot of the barriers that have been put in place and a lot of the red tape that has been holding back innovation. And as you said, like it's time to build, right? A lot of the building that needs to happen in the United States has been hampered by some of those policies, and that's the mandate that I see coming out of the Trump administration.
Yeah, one of the strongest litmus tests, when looking at overall optimism in the country is how many kids are Americans having. And we saw that drop. We saw the bust that happened during the pandemic. And Elon, I think if there's one other crusade aside from colonizing Mars, planting Neuralink in humans' brains, Boring, all the 15 other companies, it's how are we going to bring that back in terms of making sure we don't go the way of Rome and run out of Romans and have no civilization to fight for. But then there's the building component. And you mentioned the CHIPS Act. I'm thinking broadband as well. We're starting to see some of the data coming out where it's all these wokeified programs of, well, we're not going to invest in rural El Paso region, Texas, unless they have their equity, diversity, inclusion program. Have you looked into the numbers? I don't have them off the top of my head, but they have billions of dollars. They're not spending it. And where they are, we could get 1,000 times the ROI with Starlink.
Yeah, I mean, so it kind of depends on what specifically you're talking about. I think that you're referring to the BEAD program, which is the Broadband Equity and Access and Deployment something program. Please don't quote me on that. But so it's the BEAD program, and we passed $42 billion with the goal of getting America finally connected. There are millions of Americans that do not have access to broadband in this country. And that's travesty. It's absolutely ridiculous that we're still in a position where people don't have access to broadband. Since that bill was passed, not a single dollar has gone out to the states. Not a single dollar has actually been used to start laying fiber or putting up towers or anything. And I mean, I think it's ridiculous to see the way that the process has been managed under the Biden administration. So it's really heartening to see that President Trump has nominated Brendan Carr to be the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. I know this is, if you go look at his Twitter account, he's been really beating up. So Kamala Harris, as vice president, was in charge of the BEAD program for the White House.
She's the czar of all things.
She's the czar of all things. Right. So it's also funny. It's funny that we don't really talk about she on the campaign trail didn't want to talk about being the border czar, which is like that's a whole other conversation. But this is a big priority for him personally to get the money rolling, right? It's great that Congress has decided to invest in broadband deployment and getting Americans connected. But money's got to go out. Like the things have to go, and I also think that on the BEAD program and just kind of broadband in general, it is really heartening to see the Trump administration take a look again at the ways in which these programs are being deployed. Very famously, Starlink was set to be included in some funding under a different program, but it was a similar kind of idea of being able to get broadband access to rural Americans. And under the Biden administration, basically for political reasons, because Starlink is owned by Elon Musk and people don't like Elon Musk, they were cut out of that program, right? And so it'll be so on a second point. I think it's great to see that we're going to get rid of some of that partisanship, and I think that fundamentally we would all agree that tech neutrality is a thing that we talk about a lot. Like the idea that the purpose of these programs is to get people access to broadband. So whatever it takes, right? Whether that's satellite, whether that's fiber, whether that's mobile, fixed wireless, whatever it is that is the most cost-effective way to get there. That's what we should be doing, and that's one of the things that I see coming into the kind of broadband space from the Trump administration. And it's also going to be really heartening because the way a lot of these programs work is the states are coming together and making their plans and coming together with the federal government, making their plans for how they're going to use the money, how much money they want. Under the Biden administration, there was a lot of frankly ridiculous kind of progressive requirements that were being put on states. I mean, like rate regulation. They were literally going to rate regulate broadband as part of the state plans. And so, I would really applaud, and I'd be curious kind of your thoughts on how this has how you've seen this play out at the state level in Texas, because one of the things that I've seen from my perch in Washington, D.C., is that Texas really has led in pushing back against the Biden administration with regards to the broadband programs and trying to push back against those things like rate regulation. Fortunately, I think the Trump administration will be a lot better on some of those things. But, what have you been seeing on the ground here in Texas with regards to kind of how long and laborious and crazy this process has been, and not a single dollar has gone out?
Yeah, no, a lot of thoughts. I think the big one, and you've already hit on it, is there is, for states that pass their own broadband policies to allocate certain funding, I think there was a twofold component to the debate. One, you initially had folks and good friends of the foundation, and even internally we were discussing, is there a role of government in expanding access to broadband? And what happened, because the federal government allocated tens of billions of dollars, is the debate was over. The money's here, so we have to take advantage of it. And so the role of states, and where you're seeing Texas, Florida, Louisiana, others step up, is we need to be good stewards of the scarce taxpayer dollars. And so, okay, that happens because if we don't spend it, it's going to go to the Treasury, and then the U.S. government's going to use it for what was the Rand Paul. The steroid-infused hamsters that are fighting each other, and other NIH studies. So let's use it effectively to actually expand broadband rather than that. Then the second component is states like Texas that were prudent about how they approach policy. They tied their state laws with some of the federal monies coming in. So there's a matching. And this was an incentive provided by the BEAD program. And so where you're seeing the problem is there were so many additional strings attached to the BEAD monies that Texas, we're spending it in an efficient, cost-effective manner. But when it comes to federal monies, our hands are kind of tied. And so our comptroller here, Glenn Hager, who's a good patriot, a good stalwart, he's had to assemble a team of folks who are really looking through creative ways, because the federal government has instituted more barriers by providing funding, which is insane. The Biden administration, which is a profligate, spends more than a drunken sailor administration, isn't able to get the money into states to actually expand. So the final thing I'd say, and this is where I guess we're probably going to talk about net neutrality at some point, and Ajit Pai and his Reese's mug. With the FCC changing definitions of broadband, that became a more nuanced debate, and at least the Texas State House is for folks who aren't as in the weeds on exact broadband speeds. 25 download, 3 upload is kind of the gold standard right now for a lot of states, and that's
not only the gold; it's the legal standard.
Exactly. And why is that important? Well, because that's the speed necessary to access a lot of the government programs and services that purportedly, if there's a role of government in providing broadband, that's what you'd want to access and receive. And a lot of states, Texas included, tethered their definition of broadband to the FCC. And now that you're seeing some of the regulatory capture that's happening with the FCC before Brennan Carr comes in and really just cuts through that with a machete, that was another concern, is how is, again, that inextricable relationship between state and federal going to skew toward the progressive impulse of Washington. So I think you're bringing some good thoughts to mind for me too. what's going to happen with the FCC will be a watershed positive moment for states that took the lead on ensuring we're providing monies to expand broadband for those rural areas of the states, because now we can actually purportedly do so.
Yeah, and I think I want to take this moment to give a shout out to the Texas Broadband Office. And there's a couple of other states that have been really, really helpful in this as well. But I'm here at TPPF, so I'm going to focus on Texas as much as I can. I think that pushing back against those policies has also opened up space for a future, for the Carr administration and the Carr FCC to really cut through some of this stuff, and hopefully we can start getting money going out sooner rather than later.
So, okay. One more question.
We don't have to talk about net neutrality.
No. I know, there's the awkward pause. I'm like, are we doing this? We can have the discussion.
We can.
Well, let's dispense with it. We can do this in 2 minutes.
Net neutrality is bad. We should get rid of it.
It was bad in 2015. Yeah. It was bad in 2017. There was a lot of movement. I say movement more so, speculation last year about net neutrality and the commissioner bringing it back up. Mm-hmm. What's going to happen with Carr at the helm with net neutrality?
It's going away.
All right.
I mean, I can't speak for Chairman Carr.
Sure. He's been pretty clear.
But let's be real here. So it's funny. It's a really better question is actually what is the best approach to getting rid of net neutrality? Mm-hmm. So for viewers who don't know, I mean, I assume you've talked about net neutrality enough on your podcast.
We actually haven't. So
well, it's essentially the idea that all internet traffic must be treated equally, and that you can't prioritize traffic, or you can't minimize traffic, and kind of and keep certain kinds of traffic separate, right? Everything has to be treated the same. Technically, this is a very dumb way to do internet policy, because the comparison that I always make is there's different kinds of internet traffic, right? And there's different aspects of data transfers that matter. So if you're sending an email, latency, right? Latency is the time delay between the sending of a signal and the receiving of a signal. Latency doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter if your email is slightly delayed by about 3 seconds, right? That's just like the way the system works. But if you're on a video call, if you're doing an interview for a new job and you're on a video call and there's that delay, like that can be a real pain and user experience. Yeah. And then there's instances where that can actually be compounded even more. So driverless cars require a very low latency connection. So like there's reasons that you want to treat different kinds of traffic differently and different data traffic differently. So it almost certainly net neutrality will be done away with. The real bigger question is whether it will be repealed by the Federal Communications Commission, or whether they will. So currently there's lawsuits challenging in federal court, the Biden administration's net neutrality rules. There's a weird quirk of federal policy where if a rule is CRA'd or struck down by the courts, it becomes that much harder for a substantially similar rule to be promulgated. So there's this weird world where potentially they might want to let the litigation play out in order to basically get the court ruling that says that this is unconstitutional or just like a violation of the FCC's authority and all this kind of stuff. So we'll see. Regardless, net neutrality will not be the law of the land. Yeah. I think the other thing to look at in terms of things that'll be going away from the Biden administration on communications policy is digital discrimination rules. So the Biden administration, in kind of this, this woke idea of communications policy, put in these rules, these digital discrimination rules, that essentially said that if you can't have a disparate impact on minority communities in basically any way, shape, or form. With regards to the way you're deploying broadband. There's a lot of problems with that I'm happy to kind of get into, but it's pretty wonky. But that's one that I think we'll definitely also see going.
And that's, I know y'all, for folks listening, thefai.org, is that the website?
Yes, thefai.org.
So Zach made a joke
it turns out that purchasing IP addresses can be very expensive. So we are
yeah.
the FAI.org.
Right. Well, yeah, the tech policy think tank would know that. Well, y'all have written extensively, so just, shout out to y'all. Check out your commentary and publications on it. One thing we did, like any good think tank that's working in tech policy, we did a research paper on net neutrality. The only thing I'd add, everything you said is spot on, is this is an issue too where we have natural experiments when European countries have instituted net neutrality and had it as their law of the land for years. And this is tantamount to West-East Germany, where you can see what is a centralized, controlled economy versus a more free market economy. And the free market actually works. Turns out the same thing is true of countries that aren't using net neutrality. There's more R&D dollars going into actually improving broadband, improving connectivity, reducing that latency, and it's the receipts are like, this is a statistician's dream to see how clear it is that net neutrality is a drag on innovation and consumer benefits and welfare. And so this is why we haven't talked about it as much, because it's 2024. It's like, guys, this debate was settled however many years ago. And so God bless Brendan Carr and all he's done, because he has not minced words. Well, so, okay, let's bring it to another
Yeah, we can get out of telecom space.
Person that's coming into Washington and will potentially have a role in technology policy. J.D. Vance. Yeah, I was listening to the All In podcast, and they were talking about, the J.D. Vance kind of take on the Republican era of breathlessly carrying buckets of water for corporations. For him, that goes against his, Ohio, Appalachia upbringing, where we lost the working class and middle class because we did so blindly. And so there's not a tension between Trump and Vance, but Vance is introducing kind of a new flavor of conservatism, or a free market approach, if we can call it that. What do you think if Vance were to work on tech policy, where do you think he'd fall in the spectrum of policy?
It's a really good question. And I think sometimes I feel like Vance is kind of a Rorschach test. Mm-hmm. And if you look at what he said, you can kind of read what he's saying in many different ways depending on your own disposition.
Sure.
So I found people tend to kind of think a lot about his comments when, this is kind of like the Obama phenomenon, right?
Sure.
Like, one of the reasons that Obama was able to win the presidency is because he didn't have, he was in the Senate for not very long.
Right.
And so he didn't have votes. He didn't really have a lot of legislation. Mm-hmm. He's not like Bernie Sanders has, decades of things and comments and speeches that you can really hold him to, and Vance doesn't really have that, right?
Sure.
So that's all to preface and say that this is my opinion, and I don't really know.
Right.
I don't think, we've talked to his staff, and we have friends from back when he was in the Senate, and it's been really interesting to watch. So, but from a philosophical point of view, I think you're exactly right. This goes back to Hillbilly Elegy, mm-hmm. and his upbringing and all this stuff that, the idea of unfettered free market libertarianism, mm-hmm. libertarian capitalism, mm-hmm. Has been great for mm-hmm. a lot of reasons, right? It has ushered in an era of economic dynamism in America. Yeah. It's also had some pretty bad downstream effects, mm-hmm. and it's left a lot of people out of the cold. And I think especially when you're looking at places like Ohio, places mm-hmm. like West Virginia, these manufacturing hubs and places, that is really what we're looking at and what mm-hmm. we're talking about when we talk about unfettered global free markets, mm-hmm. right? Because I think, and this is where I'm kind of, perhaps projecting a little bit. I think that Vance is pretty pro-free market domestically, right?
Sure.
I think he does want competition. He comes from VC world. He mm-hmm. comes from tech, and he's part of this kind of new tech right mm-hmm. that is aligning itself with the populist right. Mm-hmm. And so I think that in the sense that he would believe in kind of the ideas of little tech and making sure that large companies aren't able to basically nuke competition, mm-hmm. Nuke upstart competition. I think he would agree with that. And there's But when you start to think globally, and the ways in which kind of the Reagan neoliberal agenda opened up the world economically, and how the United States has gotten the short end of the stick on that in terms of like manufacturing. I think we started the podcast talking about like it being time to build. Like we don't build anymore, and I think that Vance would see that as a problem, right. And I would agree with him. Right, I think what we can do to kind of use industrial policy and even the playing field, so that China doesn't continue just absolutely eating our lunch, right. in a lot of those kind of terms. So I think that's where I would. It's easy to look at Vance and be like, oh well, he was at a Y Combinator event and he like praised Lena Khan, right? It's really easy to look at that and be like, oh well, he's a conservative, and put him in that box. Right. And it's really easy to say like, okay, well, you can go look at some of his other speeches where he champions the tech sector and champions the idea of competition, and be like, oh well, he just is going to be just all the same on commercial policies. It's easy to kind of do both of those things, but I think when you take what he's talking about really holistically, there's that bifurcation between kind of, we need to break down barriers to domestic competition, whether those be regulatory barriers, whether those be red tape that are preventing competition, or whether they're unfair and anti-competitive practices by large firms. I think he's pretty agnostic about those two and thinks that we need to look at both of those. But when he's thinking globally, right, like that's where U.S. foreign policy, U.S. trade policy is going to be really important to the Trump administration and to Vance personally, as a way to kind of bring dynamism back to America. But I would pose the question back to you, like, what do you see in his comments and his philosophy and what he's done in the Senate? I mean, does what I'm saying kind of vibe with you?
Yeah. 100%. Well, I love your explanation on, well, there's a lot of ambiguity, and I think I'm just, almost further mesmerized now by the fact that he does have, so on the Joe Rogan podcast, we got to talk about Joe Rogan because we're millennials. He was like, Kamala has this incredible ability to just say nothing for so long. She can do 5, 10, 25 minutes of nothing burger platitudes. And that's Kamala's superpower in a sense, because she can never be held to anything. JD, I think you're spot on, because the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. We don't necessarily know fully where he's going to come down on, I think, TikTok and ByteDance. I think it's kind of clear where he's going to fall on that. But on a lot of the tech issues, we can conclude what we want to, because he's providing a lot of the values and the principles that are just really hard to disagree with. And so my thought would be, you started your answer by kind of talking about there's been just tremendous growth that's happened with some of this, unfettered capital L libertarian approach to development. But then there's been some things broken. They move fast and break things. And I think a great example would be subprime mortgage crisis, 0809. What happened after the fact was the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and part of what that instituted was independent reporting for accounting. So generally accepted accounting principles, where you have to contract with a neutral third party that's going to make sure we don't have another Enron type incident that flies completely under the radar. So, and actually, let me rephrase. That was post Enron that Sarbanes-Oxley happened. And so you look at that as an example of, I think J.D. Vance would say, the bailout money that came from the subprime mortgage crisis, the effect that some of the new employees of an Enron who lost everything because the company found a way to attach their entire net worth with the company, that was the working class middleman who was hit hardest by a large government that purportedly was in the business of helping advance innovation. But it was regulatory capture. It was a market distortion of certain effects. And it's not to say there's one Republican we can point to as that's the bad man who put business above the people. But JD has been more of a champion on the consumer side. And I think the reverse engineering is there is a way to have ethical, responsible growth such that we're not running roughshod over the consumer. So we're not passing policies at the expense of the individual consumer. We can support business while ensuring we're not harming the consumer individually by any of the market distortions. I'm just fascinated to see between the Office of Science and Tech Policy, some of the involvement he's going to have there. But then the next, and for the record, I hope your analysis of J.D. Vance goes viral, because I don't think folks are talking enough about what effect he could have on tech policy, because of my next question I have for you, which I know you all are involved in, and you're having discussions with some of the folks in the know, which is the OMB housing, the Doge Commission. Can you talk about?
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
Is that being overhyped? Is the Doge Commission going to be the greatest single slashing of bureaucracy this country's ever seen?
I'm going to say yes to both of those questions. Okay, well, so real quick, just to wrap up Vance with kind of a nice bow, I think, I think that there's an easy way to put him in a box, again, to say that he really hates, that he's just like Lena Khan, he's just like Tim Wu, he's just like all these progressives, that he really hates big business. I don't think that that's really the case. I think that fundamentally, he's a fundamentally conservative person who believes in, you brought up consumer welfare. I think he believes in consumer welfare. So to the extent that big business is kind of hurting consumer welfare by being anti-competitive, then like that's a problem. But it's not the same as this kind of big is bad always idea that came out of the Biden administration. So it'll be really interesting to see kind of how that plays out in reality, right? I don't think that they're gonna. I think the Trump administration will probably be a lot nicer on mergers and acquisitions than the Biden administration was. So I think there is a lot of daylight, even though it's really easy to kind of take it. It's philosophical distinctions where if you look at it, if you kind of close one eye and you look at it with your head tilted, then maybe they look the same, but not really. Doge Commission. Oh, I'm stoked. I think we've done a lot of work and written a lot about this for a very long time now. So one of the things that we care a lot about at the Foundation for American Innovation is this idea of government efficiency and government efficacy, actually. So we've done a lot of work with Congress as an institution to try and get Congress itself to start using technology in ways that make Congress more efficient and more responsive to the American people.
Do you have any examples of how inefficient Congress can be because of the lack of leveraging that?
So my favorite example of this was in Congress, right? So you have bills and people can sign on to those bills as sponsors. And the goal of any, House member or Senate member is they want to have as many sponsors signing onto their legislation as possible, right? If you could have the whole House sign onto your bill as a sponsor, then you're doing great. Yeah. So for a very long time, the way that was done, the way that you got sponsors to sign onto your piece of your legislation was you had to have an intern take a physical piece of paper to their office, technically it was supposed to be the member themselves that was signing this piece of paper. Having been an intern,
it was not.
It's never the member. It's usually like the comms director or the chief of staff that has been given the authority to sign these kinds of things. But it was literally like you would send an intern with a piece of paper to an office to sign it, right? And luckily, this is a happy story. Luckily, during COVID, that changed, and now they have an e-signing system where you can sign on as co-sponsorships, and it's like a DocuSign kind of thing. But there's lots of like little things like that. And so one of the big ones that we've been pushing is actually like using AI, like using ChatGPT in congressional offices, because there's a lot of really useful things and ways that you can use technology. Because the fundamental issue here, right, is that Congress and the Congress members themselves and their staff have a lot of responsibilities. And as with any large institution, there's also a lot of like administrative just junk that you have to do. It's just kind of how institutions work, right? I'm sure at TPPF there's absolutely no administrative red tape, and you never have to spend any time. You get to focus totally on exactly what you need to do.
I'm allowed to wear jeans to the office every day too, and I have unfettered autonomy over. That was not. I don't want to get fired for that comment, so we may have to take that one out.
Cut that one. so to the extent, so one of the problems is that Congress has lost its capacity. So if you look at the growth of government, right, literally the number of people that the government hires, that kind of continues to increase over time, whereas congressional staffing has basically stagnated for a few decades. And what that means is you don't have the capacity. You don't have as many people that have the time to become experts on things like net neutrality, right? Or healthcare, or like whatever it is that your idea is, because you're spending so much time doing some of this administrative stuff. So if we can get rid of some of this administrative bloat, using technology, using things like AI, like if it used to take you 30 minutes to draft the tweet, which I mean, that's a ridiculous idea. If it takes you 30 minutes to draft a tweet, you have bigger problems. Right, but if it took you 30 minutes to draft the letter, and instead we're gonna say, oh, well, you can have the AI do the first draft, and all of a sudden that 30 minutes becomes 10 minutes. Well, that's 20 minutes that you can use to become a subject matter expert and talk to people and actually try and get things done. So that's, I mean, now I've gone completely away from Doge Commission, but to speak about the ways that happens in the legislature.
Well, I think that's important because there's two different avenues. One is the cutting of waste. The other is augmenting or maximizing individual efficiency, which I'll give you an example. This blew my mind. I've been working in Texas politics for 6 years now. I didn't know this until this year, so maybe this is a bad sign. I'm outing myself. The Texas House has e-filing. So we had pre-filing, and we were actually on a call the day pre-filing
1,400 bills in one day.
1,400, which is insane.
Did you use AI to summarize any of those bills? Be honest.
So I have. So we have. We're actually going to have a founder of US Ledge AI on the podcast hopefully next week to talk about how her tool is doing just that. And so that's why I'm all in on increasing individual efficiency. When it comes to testifying, I'm going to write my own or have my own oral testimony, but I'm not going to read all 1,400 bills because I can't. And there's still more to come. But the point is the Senate still has in-person manual filing where we had folks in certain Senate offices that literally camped out overnight to make it to pre-filing before deadline. That is a slap in the face of those poor staffers that are underpaid already and undercaffeinated and slept as a result of this. And that's a clear avenue where, okay, there should be electronic filing for both chambers. And I don't know why that isn't the case, but that's kind of to the point of we look at where can we cut, but sometimes a lot of times in government, we don't think about how we can and should push the envelope and say, hey, the status quo probably isn't the most efficient way to move forward. So, okay, those are kind of, two of maybe 100 different avenues for Doge Commission. Yeah. But you got Elon, you have Vivek, so you have, and I think of the Twitter story where Elon comes in day one to San Francisco with his sink and the iconic picture. Yeah. And how much has changed on X now in the last, it's been a year and a half almost. And the first thing was the firing of 85% of the staff. Is that the kind of action we can expect, or is Vivek going to balance him out? What's this going to look like?
It's okay. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Yeah. This is going to come as a shock to you.
Okay.
Federal bureaucracy and the Administrative Procedures Act and the rules that are around federal employees are very strong. You're not going to see them cut 85% of federal employees. It's like, I guess maybe possibly there's some like weird world in which this all like happens to be wrapped up in a bowl. But I do think that, so let me be clear. I'm very optimistic about Doge. I'm very optimistic about the vision of Doge that was actually, I think they put it in the Wall Street Journal a couple days ago. It was a much clearer idea of what they were going to do. And essentially what they said they're going to do is they're going to have this kind of agency that's outside of government, right? This nonprofit thing. It's kind of unclear what category of nonprofit this will be in. Is it going to be a blue ribbon commission and subject to certain regulations? Is it going to be like this total independent thing where they do whatever they want? TBD, we'll see. And then they want to have political appointees in agencies who are, and this is like kind of the office of Inspector General kind of role. This is like the idea of these people that go into agencies and their whole job is to sit there and figure out where where there's inefficiencies, where there's fraud, waste, and abuse, where there's regulations that can be cut. That's a great, like, we already kind of have some of that. It's just not as formalized in the way that I think that they're talking about doing it. So that's going to be big. And then they're going to have, and then they're going to kind of come in and try and cut federal employees. I think that it's been, I mean, obviously the Roosevelt and a lot of people have put a lot of thought behind this. This was just something that they wanted.
Russ headed up the OMB last.
Yes, he did,
Trump
and he
45.
currently runs the Center for Renewing America.
That's right.
In Washington, D.C. Basically, there's this brain trust that has developed in the interim period between the first and second Trump administrations that have thought a lot about kind of how to cut federal employees. Because this is, go back to Ronald Reagan, right? Like, and firing all of the air traffic controllers. Like, this is it's a hard thing to do, and there's a lot of reasons that it's a hard thing to do. But I think that they have a much better handle on how to do that. So I do think that we will be seeing substantial cuts. I do think that you'll be seeing substantial cuts in regulations, substantial rescission of guidance, and ultimately substantial cuts in the number of employees in particular agencies. This is not going to be sequestration where it's like 10% across the board for employees. And that's going to be a good thing because the other piece of DOGE that I don't think is getting as much attention is introducing AI and other IT systems into the government to basically cover that load, right? Like if you cut employees, then they were doing things. Presumably, I mean, some of them are probably not doing anything, but they're presumably doing things. And so, where can we bring technology into the government? And this is, we talked a lot about doing this with the legislature, but at the federal level, that is magnified. Right. And there's an anecdote that I love, where so there's two anecdotes here. One is I had a friend who was contracting for the Veterans Affairs, Department of Veterans Affairs, at a time when they were trying to decide if they were going to move some processes from being physical paper processes to digital processes. Long story short, they set up a test where some people were going to do the digital and some people were going to keep doing the old paper system. And this is an anecdote. I don't have any evidence for this. But I heard that essentially what was happening is people that were doing the digital system that didn't want to switch to digital because they'd been doing the paper thing for their whole 30-year career were intentionally messing up on the digital system so that it would show and they would kind of keep the paper-based system. I think in that initial time period, they ended up keeping that system for a while and then they transferred. But these kind of things happen a lot, and there's a lot of inertia against change in federal bureaucracies. And to the extent that the DOGE Commission can come in and shake that up and say, no, we're going to force you to digitize your system, and here's how you're going to do it, and we're not going to take no for an answer. I think that's great. That's fantastic. That's what we need in the system. The caveat to that is that government procurement of technology sucks.
Oh my goodness.
It is so bad. And this is where I'd give a shout out again to Texas and your CIO who was on the panel.
Amanda Crawford.
Amanda Crawford was on the panel yesterday. She's absolutely fantastic and has done Texas in general, but she specifically have done a really great job at making a clearinghouse and making it easy for government agencies to use technology and to do these kinds of things. And that's why Texas government is still relatively lean.
To that point, if Elon, and he said $2 trillion is what he can cut, we'll see what happens there. I haven't shared this story on the podcast, but in my in graduate school, I had a capstone. And the course was managing smart and resilient cities. It was a fun course. It was great. And the way it worked is first semester, you're learning, you're a student. My professor is a former city council member, former lawmaker. So very engaging course load. And then second semester is you have a client you're partnering with to find a consulting angle to make their business run more smoothly. Well, we were partnering with the city of Austin and their tech procurement division. And so we start the process. We did something like 50 interviews, and we did some focus groups and some individual like personas. And the top line is the city of Austin, which is one of the most tech forward cities in the country, is triple or quadruple buying certain technology products, iPads, phones, and so on and so forth, because Joe in this department isn't talking to Susie in this department, isn't talking to this person here. To make matters worse, they buy all these, again, quintuple buying using taxpayer dollars, and it just be stored in some warehouse where there's this perfectly good, fine technology that's sitting there because everyone got what they needed and we have extra. And so when they need more, they forget because they don't have inventory of their own tech, and so they buy on top of what is already 3x what they need. And so we're doing the math here. Like, this is millions and millions of dollars at a city, not state level, that's completely out the window. So, extrapolate that for state and federal. I don't think folks appreciate just how important that procurement process is. And to bring it back to Amanda, our report is out there somewhere. I will say, this will get me in trouble. The city of Austin, when we presented to them our findings and we offered solutions, and one of them, the takeaway from folks we interviewed, was DIR is phenomenal as a repository for providing processes, which again, that's a Doge Commission thing. It's not sexy, but better process can save billions of dollars. So we provide the recommendations to the city of Austin. We go in and we're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and optimistic and ready to take on the world because we haven't been jaded by politics yet. And we give the presentation. And they're like, we thought you were just going to tell us we were doing everything well. We didn't expect all this hard-hitting feedback. Like, well, no, the point was to be honest and raw about this. They didn't ask a single question. They didn't ask for a report. They didn't want anything to do with this because I think this is the point of especially bad local actors that are progressively captured, is there is a vested interest in maintaining the status quo because while to improve is to change, that could threaten their own position because maybe the reason why they have their job is because everything's running so poorly that there's a perceived need for them to be there. So I hope Doge comes in and shakes it. And procurement, I think, is an opportunity. A lot of folks don't realize how lucrative it could be.
And I think, you're exactly right. Like, this is not sexy. This is not the thing that, that is really going to like drive. I mean, like, there's a lot of people that are really concerned about this and really care about this, but it's not the thing that Fox News is ever going to be like, oh, let's have a whole 3-hour panel where all we talk about is like Department of Commerce procurement reform.
Right, and the paperwork that goes into it.
Right, but like what you just said about the hardware, I think that's a point well taken. Like, software is also a big problem, and I think that one of the things to DIR's credit is that they realize that there's buying power. Like, you have massive buying power that can be leveraged and should be leveraged. And hopefully, I mean, I think if I was going to tell the Doge Commission one thing is like, think about the buying power that you have across agencies. I know that this is like, if we want to think big picture, there's problems to this, and there's definitely like current existing regulations and rules that you'd have to cut through to get to there. But I mean, if you can get the Department of Commerce and the Department of Interior and the Department of Health and Human Services to all buy the same, Office 365 like license,
interoperability,
right? Like, I mean, like,
communication.
Now you're getting me going.
I know. Well, it's even one of the recommendations I have in a cybersecurity paper is, you look at, we'll take the city of Muleshoe, Texas, which is, out west Texas.
Oh, I know where Muleshoe is.
Oh, okay.
See, I want to keep reminding your guests that only one of the people on this podcast is a native-born Texan.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I'm learning from legends here. Muleshoe got cyber attacked by Russia, and their water tower got flooded, overflowed because the actor was able to get into their system. And as we're doing research on this, City of Muleshoe came to testify and explain their story, and they're partnering with DIR and CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, and others, and they're all asking the same question. Do you all have two-factor authentication, and do you have strong passwords by default? No and no. And the point is, if you can wave a magic wand, and to your point, the purchasing power of Doge for software, if we can require 2FA and stronger passwords as a default for technology that's purchased for, water systems, critical infrastructure systems, it's not a panacea, but that's another example of money saved through, it's not fraud, waste, and abuse, but it's cyber...
not getting hacked.
Yeah, not getting hacked, and national security.
Saves money if you don't get hacked.
Yeah, yes. Well, okay, so we're running on short on time here, but I wanted to ask you, as kind of a final thought here, the proverbial magic wand question.
I hate this question.
I know, because you probably have 100 you want to wave the wand toward. But in the first 2 years, you get one major tech policy win that goes through both chambers into the president's desk. What is, let's bring it back to, we're building again.
Yeah.
What is that policy that's going to promote us being back as builders?
And here's why I struggle with this question, because at FAI we take a very incrementalist approach.
Right.
To I was asked this question in an interview one time.
Okay.
And at the end of the it was like an informal interview. And at the end of the interview, I can't remember what the answer I gave was, but at the end of the interview, I was like, oh, well, like, do you have any thoughts about, our conversation in general? He was like, yeah, my only thought is, when I asked you, like, if we could wave your magic wand, what policy would you pass? Your policy was very, like, wonky and small. It wasn't like broad sweeping policy. So with that,
I have a severability clause to
yeah,
a
it was
section
like,
of
no, I think it was like I would strip out the civil provision of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and he was like,
wow, yeah,
and he was like, yeah, but I was kind of thinking like ban abortion or whatever.
Right.
And he was like, if you could wave the magic wand like that, like stripping out this one little provision is the thing that you would do, which is a fair point. So I think I'm going to give two answers here.
Okay.
The first one's a little bit more practical, and I think is more realistic. And then while I'm giving the first one, I'll come up with a second one. Sure. So the first one is surveillance reform, which is something that I think we haven't really been talking about. But like I do think like we're talking about FISA, but also there's a lot of different like nitty gritty little things with how government is using information. I think there's this confluence right now of factors. Obviously, the Trump campaign feels as if the federal government has treated them unfairly. I mean, Matt Gaetz will not be the attorney general, but somebody will be. And there's a lot of evidence that pieces of the federal government were weaponized kind of against conservatives in the Trump administration. So there's kind of bad blood there. To the degree, I don't think that I wouldn't go out on a limb and say that the FBI was like hacking the Trump campaign, but there's definitely some bad blood there. So I think that there is a willingness in the White House to look at the ways in which federal government can be used against citizens. Senator Ted Cruz of the great state of Texas, the junior senator from Texas, is now chairman of the Commerce Committee in the Senate, and has a big, obviously this is something that he cares very deeply about. We talked about it a little bit. I think I brought it up yesterday in the on the panel. He is very concerned with how we're implementing AI systems in the federal government. He doesn't want to create Skynet. Right? He doesn't want to create this like dystopian thing where all of a sudden private information is being fed into AI systems and then weaponized and used against citizens and surveillance reform. So I think, and then obviously kind of your usual suspects on this are all still. I mean, Ron Wyden's still there. Thomas Massie and a lot of the people from the Freedom Caucus days and the kind of that side of the equation are still there. Jim Jordan's still going to be sticking around. It's small. It's small ball. It's a little bit sexier than procurement reform, but it's not like the big huge thing. And so I think that would be my wave my magic wand in the next 2 years. And the hope is that I don't actually have to wave my magic wand. The hope is that we can like actually just kind of come to agreement.
Well, that's and I'll say that's been a convergence of old and new tech too. Like in Texas, some of the broadband folks and the great patriots that really paved the way for what is Austin today. We have a lot of meetings with on FISA, on Patriot Act, and other reforms that we can look at where we're seeing a shift from surveillance state from the government to that's happening with private sectors, and sometimes in cahoots with one another. And think about data brokers and other kind of low-hanging fruit. We probably shouldn't be selling the personal sensitive information of Americans to the Chinese Communist Party. It seems like a pretty reasonable thing. I think most folks can agree with.
No, I completely agree with you. I think that's the kind of stuff that we should be talking about. And obviously, there's been a lot of conversations about privacy, consumer privacy online. I think you can get a lot of the way there with like a pretty comprehensive, strong surveillance anti-surveillance package. the big wave my magic wand. I think it'll be really interesting. Because there's a lot of things that I want. There's a lot of like little stuff. I think the one big thing, if I could wave my magic wand, and I don't have an actual, like a big solution here, but if we can open up the digital ecosystem, kind of open up platforms, open up, whether it's app stores, whether it's, Google search. I mean, this is what all of these lawsuits are about fundamentally, is this idea that there's a famous quote that floats around on Twitter that the internet has become 5 websites that all consist of screenshots from the other 4, right? Like this is not the internet that we used to have.
Sure.
We used to have a lot more control over what we did online, a lot more control over, as users, over kind of our experiences, and what we wanted and what we didn't want. We don't really have that anymore. We have a lot of walled gardens, and you kind of take it or leave it propositions. How we get there is a big question. That's a whole other hour conversation. But I think that we can start taking steps to getting back to that place. And that doesn't mean tearing down every platform. That doesn't mean breaking up Google. That doesn't mean destroying Facebook and building it up from the ashes. I think that we can take what we have and we can make it better. And it's a very positive, because sometimes there's a negative vision here, right? I think Lena Khan and Tim Wu presented a very negative vision of tearing down what we have in digital spaces and digital platforms. But there's a positive vision of taking what we have and making it better. And I think we can make it better.
Yeah.
But now I can pose the question to you. What is you wave your magic wand, David Dunmore?
We're talking national, not state. And I got to be quick because I think I see our other podcasters that are coming to the studio here. Let's go. I'll go state first. At the state level, we need to get this AI law right. And we had a discussion about this yesterday. California's Senate Bill 1047, it fails. Colorado's state AI bill, it's signed with hesitation and reservation. Texas is in a position with its 31 plus million population and its gigantism industry that we have here. If we get this right with our AI policy, then that could become the law of the land for other states. So the magic wand is that we get something that balances the human agency and innovation, and we're getting closer and closer every day. We're going to head shortly after here to the stakeholder meeting with Chair Capriglione so we can answer that question.
Shout out to Gio.
Shout out to Gio, who's the man. So that's my state policy. At the federal level, man, I'm getting more and more hawkish on China with tech, and the cybersecurity avenue is the big one. I think anything we can do to kind of back to that small, boring, incremental, we need two-factor authentication, we need stronger passwords, we need to prioritize air gapping critical infrastructure systems and making sure we're doing everything we can to keep foreign rogue nations out of the land, airspace, and otherwise around our critical infrastructure systems, whether that's LiDAR technology being bought from China, whether that's Temu and TikTok and some of the threats we're seeing there. Let's get China out of our tech and bringing it back to the J.D. Vance point. We're not anti-corporation. We're not anti-big tech. We're anti-harms. And China will do whatever they can to peddle their opium over here. So let's build the good stuff in America. Let's keep building. Let's build on the momentum of we're back, and let's show China that we can do to them what we did in the last Trump administration. So that is a puffery political answer for you, but I really think the anti-CCP screed can become anti-CCP policy. That's really just a pro-America first tech agenda, which I'm confident that we've got the ingredients to get that there. So Luke, thanks, man, for joining us. Like this has been a lot of fun, and I hope this is the first of many to come. Either I'm out in Washington D.C. Joining you all at FAI. Once again, shout out thefai.org. Yep. We'll have it linked in the show notes below. Any final words before we sign off here?
I would just remind your viewers again that one of us is native Texan and the other one is not.
Who's wearing boots?
Look at that. I wear the Chuck Taylor today.
Oh, okay.
No,
that's funny.
I love what y'all are doing here. I think y'all do really fantastic work, and I mean, we've long been partners in a lot of stuff, so I'm happy to join. And this is an open invitation anytime you're in DC to come on our podcast and come hang out or just come have drinks with me. The only other thing I'd say is smash that subscribe button. Yeah. Smash that like and subscribe button. I don't do this for a living. I think y'all are doing some fantastic work, and it'll be heartening to see how states and the second Trump administration can kind of come together on a lot of these issues.
Yeah, well said and agreed. Well, again, thank you, Luke. And for us, TexasPolicy.com for all things tech policy, thefai.org. They've been doing this longer than we have. They have more commentary and research, so maybe you can compare and contrast and tell us where we should work together so I can tell my boss we need to. Well, thanks.